Since 1972, the McIlvaney Financial Group has been a conservative, contrarian investment firm. With that mindset, they have created a multifaceted approach to portfolio management, offering a wide array of services including hedging through precious metals, wealth advising, a unique short fund, and an excellent educational resources. We have had David McIlvaney on our show multiple times because we respect his outlook, viewpoints, and recommendations. You really need to take advantage of the free portfolio risk analysis and bank safety ratings they're offering our listeners. Just call them at 1-800-525-9556, and you will be put in touch with an advisor with years of experience who can take 15 minutes and give you a much better understanding of what true portfolio diversification is. Again, call them at 1-800-525-9556 and benefit from their expertise. Hi everyone, this is Jason Barrack of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. She is president and publisher of the Solari Report. She also served as managing director and member of the board of directors of the Wall Street investment bank Dillon, Reed & Company, as assistant secretary of housing and federal housing commissioner at the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development in the first Bush administration, and was the president of Hamilton Securities Group. She has designed and closed over $25 billion of transactions and investments to date, and has led portfolio and investment strategy for $300 billion of financial assets and liabilities. Catherine Austin Fitts, thank you for joining me again.
Jason, always a pleasure.
Now, Catherine, I want to ask you about Donald Trump since he's been in office a couple months now. How much corruption from both political parties, the bureaucracy, and the deep state is President Trump up against that wants to prevent him from making any meaningful changes?
I think the corruption is unbelievably significant. And as much as Trump understood about the corruption before he went to Washington, I think he's still getting educated, and his team is still getting educated about it and having to grapple with it, and also grapple with the fact that the corruption is from sea to shining sea. It's not just in the Beltway. The Beltway is a reflection of the whole entire system, both, the domestic system politically and the global financial system.
That's a great point. And you saw that the president of South Korea was just impeached and arrested. And I try to tell my listeners for perspective here, it's an enormous scandal in South Korea, but that type of corruption happens at all levels of government, basically, in the United States on a daily basis.
Well, here's the thing. The United States government has operated outside the law, both constitution and financial management laws, for quite some time. Certainly since I've become familiar with the federal budget. So starting with fiscal 1998, we have over $11.5 trillion in undocumentable adjustments, and the federal government has refused to produce audited financial statements as required by law. Now, if you were a public company, the exchange would not let you trade on the exchange. You wouldn't be allowed to issue securities. Your bank wouldn't affect transactions. So you couldn't function with impunity outside the law because there are all sorts of checks and balances to require you to do so. But interestingly enough, the federal government is the largest issuer of securities in the world, and the market continues to allow them to borrow money and issue securities despite the fact that they are in complete defiance of the law and have been for more than a couple decades.
Do you think that's largely in part because of the strength of the U.S. military, or do you think that's because of other reasons?
I think it's because of a combination of the strength of both the federal financial mechanism, including the status as a reserve currency, and the strength of the U.S. military and the intelligence agencies. I think the intelligence agencies are a big part of it. And the power of our digital surveillance and control has been added. So I think it's really a combination of our ability to function, or those two things, both the central banking function and with the reserve currency and the military intelligence complex, gives us the ability to operate, basically to, make up our own law day to day, if you will.
Now, I want to talk a little briefly about the Syria strikes that Trump was involved in the last week or so. Do you think Trump is a warmongering neocon now, or do you think he was maybe duped or tricked into this by some type of, military-industrial complex or deep state strategy, or do you think it was something else why Trump decided to do this?
Well, I'm not sure. Clearly, I believe the so-called sarin gas attack was a false flag. The question is who did it. And there are all sorts of theories about who might do it, and I hate these kinds of theories because, what we need is the facts, and there have been no facts presented that would really help us understand who was responsible. I agree with Ron Paul that there's zero chance that Assad, makes no sense for Assad to do this. We were heading towards some kind of rapprochement between Assad, Russia, and the United States, and this was clearly designed to stop it and turn it in the other direction, which it's done. Why Trump did what he did, I have no idea, because he has access to intelligence that we don't, and that's the curious thing. Why do we keep heading this way? One thing I think is a factor is that the Nord Stream pipeline was approved by the EU on last Tuesday. I think that was the 4th, and suddenly the Qatar-Turkey pipeline is now trying to get back in the game. So part of what we're watching in pipeline politics, but it's not so much getting just the gas sales or keeping Russia from getting closer to Europe. I think part of the issue is we want to stay the reserve currency. That's a critical financial need on the part of the U.S., and right now the dollar is in essence on an oil standard. So I think part of this is the pipeline politics as it relates to reserve currency. Now there's another theory floating around, and that's the military did this to make clear to Xi Jinping, who the president was meeting with at the same time, that we were going to get tough. Now, who knows, but it's now being reported in the Korean press that China is moving 150,000 troops up to the North Korean border. And there's all sorts of saber rattling back and forth between the United States and North Korea. I'm assuming if they're moving those troops up, it's because they don't want a lot of Koreans moving over into China, so they don't want an immigration problem. So there are many sort of interesting facts and a lot of theories running around, but I don't know why Trump did it. Clearly doing it is going to be tremendously harmful to him in his base support, because one of the things he was promising was not to continue to engage in, war in the Middle East. We sent 59 Tomahawk missiles in. That cost $94 million. $55 million will replace the lead pipes in Flint. And so basically, this is going to be 2 more towns that continue to experience chemical assault from their government in the United States on the theory that we want to stop chemical assaults on citizens in Syria.
That's a great point. And there was a lot of military people and people in the police who voted for Trump, one of the main reasons they voted for Trump is because of his foreign policy stance, that he did not want to get involved in any Middle East wars because of, the tweets he had put out in the past about Syria. But it's just curious that now things have changed so much. I've also heard rumors too, Catherine. I'm not sure if you've heard this. You talked about the troops close to the North Korea border. I've heard from Luke Rudkowski of We Are Change that there's a lot of American troops and tanks amassing in Jordan on the border into Syria, planning for a ground strike into Syria by June 1st at the latest. So that's scary times as well.
Well, the question is why. And I think, my only concern here is there's information we don't know, because normally you would think Trump would not do this. I mean, part of the challenge you have as the President of the United States is what I call the red button problem, which is when asked if they would push a red button to stop hard narcotics trafficking in their country, their county, their city tomorrow, at a conference where I was talking to it was a conference on evolving our society spiritually, 99% of the audience would not push the red button because they don't want their pension funds to go down. They don't want their government checks to stop, because our financial system is so dependent on laundering illegal money. So we have an economy which is dependent on warfare and organized crime and debt, and the citizenry has for many, many decades sent the message to Washington, we want our check and we want to be able to feel that we're good Christians, so you make sure that the red button doesn't get pushed, but meantime, make up a story for us that says we're all good. So here's the question: is Trump going in there, because he's trying to protect the reserve currency status, and he doesn't want to communicate with the Americans on the red button problem, or is it something else? I don't know, but it's clearly a 180 from everything he said during the campaign, and this is a man who's worked very hard to keep his campaign promises.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think there's a big question why, and I don't know the answer. To me, the most important question here is, who engineered the false flag?
Yeah, I think Trump's having a hard time keeping a lot of his campaign promises because of, the leaks that are involved at all different levels of the bureaucracy and his administration. Like, I've heard his chief of staff has been leaking. His Ivanka Trump's husband, Jared Kushner, has been leaking. I've heard rumors of that as well, a lot from a couple different sources. So, I mean, if those people closest to him are going to leak, it's going to be an enormous problem for him. In terms of, you just got back from Europe. What's your views then on Europe? Do you think Europe's falling apart? Is it a lot different than the last times you visited Europe?
Well, I never find Europe falling apart. I find Europe to be, if you look at the day-to-day life and the infrastructure, it's much higher quality than here. So I find Europe to be a stronger, healthier place in terms of the life of the average citizen than it is here. So there's much more cohesion. The civic life is healthier. The environment is more human. The food is better. The infrastructure is much higher quality. Now, albeit I've spent more time in Northern Europe than in Southern Europe, and Southern Europe is really taking the economic hit. But I don't find Europe falling apart at all. I think a very big question, though, is what is the future of the European Union? A lot of that depends on the French elections. And the French elections are much more complex than you understand when you read the press here. Everything is oversimplified. And you have to go through a series of rounds. The first one, I think, is the third week in April. And depending on how the French elections go, you really could see the European Union fall apart. Now, my guess is, given what's happened in Austria and Netherlands, the European Union, France will stay in and the European Union will hold, but it's too early to tell.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I see on TV that they're saying everything is well in Europe, but when I check Twitter, I see that there's a huge immigration problem in a lot of parts of Europe, whether it's France, whether it's England, whether it's Germany. A lot of those Scandinavian countries that are very politically correct, they're very high tax. Bernie Sanders likes them as success. He calls them successful social democracies, but I see very large emerging problems coming from there that the mainstream media tends to ignore.
Well, I agree that there's an immigration problem because there's no doubt the leadership encouraged way too much immigration. The number one being, if you look at what the U.S. did in Libya, it literally uncorked Africa. And that has been the channel through which tremendous immigrants have flowed. But so clearly there's been too much immigration. At the same time, if you look at a lot of the media that is highlighting the immigration, I think a lot of the violence has been covert operations, not immigrants acting up, but covert operations made to look like immigrants acting up. So I'm a little bit suspicious. I do think the immigration has been way too much, and I'm hoping that this backlash that's been occurring around the world will encourage the leadership to understand that in the West, we love Western culture, and we want to preserve and nurture it and improve it, not destroy it. So let's hope the leadership has gotten the message.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the cultures there are being forced to drastically change Whereas I've heard stories, you just got back from the Netherlands, and also I've heard in Germany that, if you're caught eating like pork in front of a Muslim that just went there, that people are getting beat up. I've seen YouTube videos of women, pretty white women who, walk in the streets of Europe and they're scared. So, that's definitely a change of culture over there going forward. But, I think the underlying thing I'm noticing, Catherine, is that the taxpayer, with Brexit, with Donald Trump winning the election, there's kind of a taxpayer revolt that they cannot afford. Part of the immigration problem is there's so many, whether it's Europe or the United States or England, there's so many benefits that immigrants can get. The taxpayer who's like the middle class taxpayer, their standard of living is declining through inflation and taxes over the years, and they're just tired of paying higher and higher taxes and getting their standard of living destroyed.
Okay, so let's talk about budget, because I think this all comes down to the budget. So I'm going to use the U.S. as an example. There's $11.5 trillion missing from the federal budget since fiscal 1998. $11.5 trillion. We have $20 trillion of debt. That's more than half the debt. So we have a budget, and then the world spends $1 trillion a year on military and weaponry. America is a war economy looking for a war. And, we can't afford for war to stop because our whole economy depends on more war, more war, more war. And it's bankrupting all of us. It's like a tapeworm that's eating the host. So immigrants are a drop in the bucket. And I'm not saying we should waste money on stupid immigration. We shouldn't. But if you look at the way the federal budget works, we pay taxes, and then the federal budget uses that to go out and borrow goo gobs of money. The money comes into the federal budget, and then huge amounts disappear. And they've been disappearing every year for years. And then we spend a whole lot on wars, and we go over to Afghanistan and have a war, and then the assets end up not in the federal budget who paid for the war, but they end up in the ownership of private corporations, or the technology that gets developed during the black budget gets owned by corporations. So there are several major structural flaws, which is we're liable for the debt and we put our taxes in, but in fact all the assets accrue to private organizations and it's run outside the law and money's disappearing in vast amounts. That is what is draining all of us.
Great point. Yeah, and the Federal Reserve is one of the main engineers of all this. I think without the Federal Reserve, you couldn't have a big American empire, a warfare state, and a welfare state. The Federal Reserve is probably the main culprit of this. I interviewed former Federal Reserve insider Danielle DiMartino Booth a few weeks ago, and she said the Fed is heavily politicized now that Trump won the election, and Janet Yellen and the other hardcore Democrats at the Fed want to raise interest rates 2 more times in 2017, so asset markets fall significantly. She said Yellen wants to blame Trump and the Republicans for a recession and asset prices falling or crashing so Democrats can win back more seats in Congress during the 2018 elections and also limit Trump's damage to only one term. What do you think about Danielle DiMartino's opinion of what the Federal Reserve will do for the rest of 2017?
Well, I think there's pressure to raise interest rates, one, because inflation is rising, but two, because one of the greatest problems in our society is misallocation of capital. Capital basically being free to large players, whether it's government or large corporations, and savers getting slaughtered. And if you look at the pension funds and you look at the retirement funds, the insurance companies who are responsible for all sorts of retirement savings, they've been getting no yield. And government, that's a windfall subsidy to government. So, if I was at the Fed, I would be pushing for a steady rise in interest rates. I don't think that crashes the markets whatsoever. And the reason why, historically, the equity markets are generally able to incorporate rising interest rates up to about 100 to 150 basis points a year. So I don't think, they're clearly talking about keeping it within a 75 to 100 basis point per year, which is not a lot. Now, I understand our society is highly leveraged, but I think savers, I, for one, am tired of seeing savers being required to subsidize government. So I would be for that, and I don't think that's necessary. I don't know the politics of the people at the Fed at this point, but I certainly think the savers deserve to be better represented. Now, I don't think interest rates are going to go up a lot, because if you look at the demographics globally, the nature of the demographics are probably for significant more flows into savings that keeps interest rates low for a while.
So you don't think then that the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates 2 or 3 more times in 2017? You think maybe one more time and that's about it?
No, I think they'll do, the max they'll do is 25 basis points a quarter, which is 100 basis points a year. And the equity market should have no trouble incorporating that. Now, I say that, and we are way overdue. In a long-term bull market, you should have regular corrections. We are totally overdue for a 20 to 25% correction, which I think would be healthy and natural. And, I hope to see it happen this year, although I don't know if it will. But I don't think that has anything to do with interest rates. I think that has to do with just letting the market be the market.
The people on CNBC wouldn't be happy with that type of correction. They'd start screaming for the Federal Reserve to do something and reverse course. But yeah, I mean, it's very unnatural for the stock market and other asset markets to have gone up so much since the 2008 financial crisis and Ben Bernanke's intervention.
Well, I don't think it's not the levels that bother me. It's the absence of correction. So I'm not a great believer in the stairway to heaven that the market should go up a little bit every day forever. So in a healthy bull market, you have consolidations and corrections. And if you look statistically at the sort of when they should happen, we're way overdue for a major correction.
Yeah, I agree. I want to ask you now about your newest Solari report. It's entitled "The Global Harvest and What It Means to Investors." It seems to me that food quality has become more expensive. Portion sizes at many restaurants are decreasing while the menu price stays the same or goes higher for years now. This looks like stagflation. I've heard some people like Dr. Pippa Malmgren call it shrinkflation. Do you see this trend with higher food prices continuing going forward?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about it. It's one of the reasons we did our annual wrap-up on the global harvest. I think that food prices have not been on many people's radar screens. The sort of percentage of a household budget that's gone to food in the U.S. has dropped steadily for quite some time. It flatlined only because people were eating out so much. Now, I think one of the ways that happened was the quality of the food has gone down dramatically. So having just got back from Europe, I have to say the quality of the food in Europe is significantly higher than it is in the U.S. But the other thing is that the price volatility has been nowhere near as great as energy or other items in the household budget. I think all of that is about to change, and food is about to become, particularly high-quality food, steadily more expensive, and food inflation, if you want high-quality food, is going to be very, very important. It's interesting. We had a great Solari report with one of the top butchers in the world, and one of the things he pointed out was that Europeans spend double what the Americans spend for food, but they spend half of what they spend for health care. So you can spend it on the front end or the back end, whichever you like. The other thing we wanted to point out, Jason, was because the global system has been working and globalization has been strong for quite a while now, we tend to forget which countries are have food surpluses and which are depend on importing food. And I wanted to take a very detailed look at who is, sort of net food plus in terms of food surpluses. So who's got food power? And we've got one graph on page 20 called The Power of Food, and I show, the extent to which the Anglo-American Alliance, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States are really food export juggernauts. And that's one of the areas that they get their real political power, and I think that's going to continue.
That's a great point. Yeah, I've watched food documentaries in the past, and I've spoken with a lot of people like Joe Salatin and others. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture, I think, they subsidize a ton of things, so the American farmer has crop insurance and other things, and they can export, the super crops like corn and soybeans and wheat. And, that allows the U.S. to maintain political power globally, but like foreign farmers, then they can't afford to compete with this subsidized food that's imported into their own country. So that's the trade-off.
Right. It's an ugly model. It's interesting because there was when Trump published his budget blueprint and his big budget's due out in May, there was real talk of cutting, even canceling the farm subsidies. So I'm going to be very interested to see what they do. If they do cancel them, it's going to radically change the, a farmer's consideration in the United States of does he grow one of the big five crops and for export market, or does he sell locally? Because particularly if you can get real movement on the food safety rules, which are really destroyed the local markets, farmers can make a lot more locally.
Yeah, and organics, buying organic food, which some people say that organic fruits and vegetables or organic beef, there's no nutritional difference. But when you measure, the vitamins and the minerals and other stuff in these foods, there's a huge difference. I've heard Joel Salatin compare, GMO eggs versus organic eggs and the amount of vitamins and other nutrients in the non-GMO chickens, where the chickens aren't fed antibiotics and other stuff. It's huge difference.
Right. One of the things we did in the annual wrap-up is I think another reason food has not been on people's radar screen is it's not an investment allocation, so it's not an asset class in of itself. So I pulled out all the publicly traded foods in the U.S. markets and then organized them by the different places where they're allocated. So it crosses consumer defensive, consumer cyclical, and then land and real estate, basic materials, equipment, etc. So it crosses many different areas. And anyway, we listed them all up. And, food is something that has inelastic demand. And depending on what the economy looks like in the future, that inelastic demand may translate into making it a more attractive investment category.
Yeah, I think food, precious metals, and energy are pretty safe long-term investments because, people still need to fill up the car to go to work. They're going to need air conditioning if it's in the summer in their hot area, and people have to eat pretty much no matter what. I mean, I guess they can cut back a little bit, but they still have to have a certain amount of calories to at least function each day. So I think those are, good staple investments long-term.
Well, it's inelastic demand.
Yeah.
It's inelastic demand, and particularly in an environment where dividend matters, there's nothing like inelastic demand.
There was supposed to be an organic farmland real estate investment trust that was supposed to go public in the next couple of years. I'm not sure what happened to it, but I was looking at researching about maybe starting one a couple of years ago. I think it's not a bad idea for more organic farmland to increase, and it only takes, I think, 2 or 3 years to take the old soil that's been with these with the crazy fertilizers and the other pesticides and Roundup and all that. It only takes about 3 years, I think, to transition it back to organic.
Well, it's amazing. If you look at the demand, it's one of the demand for fresh, organically grown food is one of the star performers if you look at sort of industries that are growing. So I think the consumer's really driving this, and it's going to continue.
Yeah, I agree. I changed my diet a couple of years ago. I was very sick, and I had way too much sugar in my diet, and I was eating too many carbs. So I try to eat, organic chicken and a lot of fruits and vegetables, and then I take a lot more multivitamins and other supplements, and I feel a lot better than I did before. I was very sick. I almost had type 2 diabetes. I was that sick.
Ah!
Well, Catherine, I hear a lot of hedge fund managers, talk now about this global dollar shortage, but I see record amounts of dollar-denominated debt outstanding. According to the Bank of International Settlements, it's over $10 trillion. What's your opinion about this global dollar shortage?
Well, during particularly after the bailouts, we made an effort to loan enormous amounts of dollars globally, and now with the commodities dropping and the globalization retreating, it's much harder for the people who borrowed those dollars to earn the dollars they need to pay it back. So, and with the dollar strong, it puts them in a little bit of, I call it the bear trap, dollar rally. So it puts them in a bit of a trap. Is there a shortage? I don't know. But there's no doubt you've got a whole world of people who owe dollars, and it's becoming much harder to earn those dollars.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think it's a shortage. I think, that's an excuse that the people who borrowed all the dollars and didn't care if they could pay them back are now saying.
Well, I don't think this was an accident. I think it was a plan. So if you're trying to keep the dollar going as the reserve currency, you want to get everybody over a barrel, and they did. So I think it's a managed shortage, but I wouldn't consider it a true shortage.
So you think then this is kind of intentional to keep the dollar higher on the dollar index than it should be, and maybe then during the next global financial crisis, a lot more money then will come back into U.S. dollars and U.S. Treasuries, even more than's already coming back in now?
No, I think the goal is to keep everybody in the dollar system. So you're very liberal in your lending because, after all, you can just print it, and that hooks them into the dollar system. That gives you political power as their lender.
Yeah, that's a great
point.
So
I just think you're trying to keep them. You're trying to keep them in the tent. It's what Lyndon Johnson said about Bobby Kennedy. He said, "I'd rather have him in the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in."
Yeah, because China's doing these currency swaps with their trading partners to set up more liquidity, but I mean they're nowhere near the size of global trade in dollars. So China has over 30 currency swaps out with trading partners, but they're only for a couple $1 billion each here. They're not to the levels that the U.S. has given out for dollar-denominated loans and debt.
Well, but here is our challenge. The U.S. is using financial force, things like the financial sanctions, money laundering rules, all sorts of dirty tricks, and it's also using its military to stay the primary player, both on the military side and the central banking side, so that they can stay the reserve currency. But we're using more and more force and more dirty tricks to do it. And the more we use those, the more we lose our soft power. So the quality of our brand is diminished dramatically and continues to do so. We're going from the image of the shining light on the hill to a bully. And the thing that I think is very hard for the Trump supporters to kind of live with is there was great hope when you heard the president's inauguration address talking about not meddling in other countries, instead being a shining example. And so there was real hope that we could go back to sort of improving our soft power and our brand. And the events in Syria have pretty much devastated that. So I would say that our image and our reputation globally is pretty tarnished. And the problem is that when you lose that, the financial system depends on liquidity. Liquidity depends on the rule of law. And when somebody's just basically a criminal enterprise and a bully, it's simply a matter of time until everybody makes arrangements away from them. So I expect the dollar to continue to diminish, and I don't know how long or how excellent our weaponry can hold it up. But if you look at the system itself, the Federal Credit Mechanism, it's encouraged massive decreases in productivity. Everybody climbs up the ladder depending on how political and good they are at encouraging centralization as opposed to merit. So we're taking, force is taking a political system as far as it can go, and I just don't think it can go all the way. So I think by trying to do it this way, we've baked in our failure long term. So I don't see the dollar staying as the reserve currency forever.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of foreigners don't like the American government anymore. And, with all these scandals that has come out, whether it's Edward Snowden with his leaks or WikiLeaks and Vault 7, they're starting to really distrust American corporations and how easily they're willing to cooperate with government agencies to spy on, foreign corporations or foreign governments. So, right away, this isn't going to mean that the dollar is going to lose world reserve currency. But like you said, over the long term, all these things together add up.
Well, here's the thing. Financial systems and markets depend on the rule of law. And in 2000, I went to visit with the chief of staff to the head of one of the appropriation subcommittees, and they asked me what I thought was going on at HUD, and it was somebody I didn't know, so I was trying to be discreet. I said, I don't know, what do you think is going on at HUD? They said HUD is being run as a criminal enterprise. Now, HUD is run by the Treasury Department, the Department of Justice, the New York Fed member banks, and the big defense contractors. So if it's being run as a criminal enterprise, they're running it, which means the federal government is being run as a criminal enterprise, which I absolutely believe it is, and I can give you chapter and verse and lots of great examples. I just had a wonderful entrepreneur on the Solari Report who sold his company for $1 billion. The reason he sold his company for $1 billion was, even though he'd founded and built the company and loved the company, he spent 5 years and $25 million litigating with the federal government. They came after him and the company on a key tam lawsuit, and their behavior was completely lawless. Completely lawless. And what you realize is, wait a minute, these guys don't practice the law, they don't believe the law. There are too many people who talk about the Department of Just Us, JUST -US, and laugh. It's not funny. So I don't see how you can continue to be the global reserve currency, if your enemies don't fear you and your allies don't trust you, you've got a problem.
Yeah, and I think, things really accelerated under the Obama administration because the IRS was used to target, libertarian and conservative groups for audits and all those things. And in the Department of Justice, like you said, whether it was Eric Holder with his corruption scandals or Loretta Lynch, a ton of people inside the Department of Justice, money was funneled from corporate fines. It was funneled to, illegal special interest groups and Democratic charities and things like that. So it's very frustrating that all these crimes were committed, and it's the politically elected people at the top that are doing them that we're supposed to have trust in.
Well, wait. It's not just politically, it's not just the people at the top. America's 3,100 counties, the narcotics trafficking, mortgage fraud is happening in each one of them, and it's being done by people who live there. So this, the corruption and the fraud, the dirty money works bottom up, and it is in every neighborhood throughout the country. And, the story I told about the red button, if we won't push the red button, there's no way Congress or the president can. So this comes down to not only who will push the red button, but who will sit down and figure out how to turn it green? How do we push, because our economy is deeply dependent on debt, warfare, and organized crime. And if we want to change, we've got to sit down and say, okay, we're all going to have to change, and we're all going to have to stop depending on this money from debt, organized crime, and war. How do we do that, and how do we go back to making money the honest way? And it's going to have to be all of us because, everybody who gets a government check is dependent on the model. So Congress can only do what the country's willing to do. If you're Congress or the president, you can only change a policy if there's an 80% consensus for a big policy change. And one of the reasons Congress can't reach a plan on health care or reach a plan on any of these things is because you've got all these different constituency groups, both the general population and corporate, who are not willing to buy into something that is fundamentally economic productive. So let's take healthcare, Jason, as an example. Pharmaceutical companies are not willing to be subject to market forces. Insurance companies not willing to be subject to market forces. Individuals not willing to change their diet and do all the sorts of things that make you, not need a lot of really expensive, wasteful health care. So the general population doesn't want to, give up their corn chips and their nachos and cheese. So I'll give you another great statistic. A friend of mine last year sent me the grocery sales for the prior year, ending June 30, 2016. Well, Americans spent $2 billion on fresh fruits and vegetables and $10.5 billion on carbonated drinks. Right?
Yeah, it's very disproportionate. And even if you teach someone good nutrition, it's what do they say about people sticking to a diet? They'll stick to it for a short amount of time and then it's right back to bad habits. It's very tough to get people in good habits anymore.
Well, it can happen, but all I'm saying is if you go throughout the healthcare system, Switzerland, the wealthiest country in the world, spends $6,000 per capita on healthcare. We spend over $9,000, and our health care, I assure you, is nowhere near as good as Switzerland's.
Yeah, and the U.S. spends more money than everyone else, I think, for education in our education system, but it's wasteful. Look at our test scores for science and math. So the amount of money that's it's being wasted. So it's not for lack of resources.
So Congress, I'm telling you, the change we need has got to come. We need a major shift in consciousness, and then we all have to individually shift our money. So in 1998, when I was sort of trying to do something about the corruption, never forget it, I was writing a check on J.P. Morgan Chase, and I froze, and I said, why am I banking with the bank that does all this corrupt stuff? And I said to myself, I've got to come clean. So I've got to clean up my own, I've got to go through my whole income statement, I've got to go through my whole balance sheet, and I've got to stop misbehaving, and I've got to stop doing business with people who are misbehaving. I just have to come clean, and I need to get all the dirty players out of my wallet. And I did. It took a long time, and I'll tell you, life started to get much more pleasant after I got all those guys out. There's like an energetic poison that comes with them, so it's just like get them out, get the parasite out of your back pocket. So I did, and in fact, we have an article up at the Solari Report called "Coming Clean." You can find it on a search. And it's sort of a step-by-step on how to clean up yourself. And I'll tell you, if 325 million people would just come clean in America, we don't need Washington. And I can prove it to you. If you took how much we spent, if we took 50% of what we spent on beer and hard liquor, if we took 100% of what we spent on the lottery, and if we, took what we spent on hard narcotics, or even 50%, and you pulled that money and did local venture funds and economic development, we have enough money under our control to fix the whole economy.
Well, Congress is starting to open up crowdfunding, right? Crowdfunding websites where people on Main Street, like retail investors, can start making. I'm not sure if it's fully open yet, but the plan is in the next couple of years to open up. But that's a great point you made about, the one last real true vote people have is to vote with their money. So if you don't like the business that Walmart or someone else is doing, don't buy from them. So that's the best protest you have, is to vote with your money. So if you don't like the type of business that a company is running in that industry, just don't buy from them then. My last question.
So I have to tell you one thing. If anybody listening to this ever flies United again, don't blame Washington. I don't know if you saw what happened on United Airlines.
I saw the guy got dragged out. But, in general, Catherine, I don't like a lot of the American Airlines companies. I mean, they're all very stupid and bureaucratic now. At one point, they were totally controlled by the government. I think they all, like a few decades ago, didn't they all have to be bailed out by the U.S. government anyway?
Right. Well, it's complicated, but I agree with you. There's no doubt when, I fly a lot internationally, the non-American airlines are far superior.
Well, yeah, I think there's less regulation there. I think it's so bureaucratic at this point. My last question for you, though, Catherine, before I let you go, has to do with the next global financial crisis. What do you think the probability is we have another global financial crisis similar to 2008 in the next 2 or 3 years?
I think the chances of it happening this year are 10% or less. I think the chances of it happening in 2018 and 2019 are higher. I don't know what. A lot of the fraudulent debt got moved over onto government balance sheets, and so government can deal with it. I'm much more concerned about a combination of inflation and the middle class in the developed world getting steadily wiped out. And I'm much more concerned about mind control technology and what it's going to do to our spiritual and cultural health, and debasement of sort of environmental pollution or other government chemical assaults on the citizens. If you look at the heavy metals in the spraying, if you look at what's in vaccines, I'm really concerned about a combination of physical debasement and financial debasement and what it's going to do to the health of the population.
By mind control technology, Catherine, do you mean the content that the mainstream media like the New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN are putting out, and how a lot of people, there's stuff on dating websites now where a lot of single women, they won't even talk to someone if they didn't vote for Hillary Clinton?
So no, I'm talking about entrainment technology and subliminal programming. So I'm talking about really sophisticated and powerful technology to get you addicted without your knowledge. I think it's behind a lot of, online gambling. If you look at gambling addictions, if you look at pornography addictions, a lot of these addictions come with the use, I believe, of entrainment technology and subliminal programming. We have a great Solari report on entrainment technology because I became very concerned at one point that my clients, from an investment advisory standpoint, were being targeted and encouraged to do rotten investments with that kind of technology. And and now as we see 5G roll out, the potential for sort of mass mind control is very significant and serious.
That's very interesting, because I think a lot of Americans, unfortunately, Catherine, the ones who watch, the mainstream media stuff, I think they're brainwashed already. So making them, even more of a robot or a zombie, I'm not sure, if they could do more than just brush their teeth or the very basics in life then.
Well, I'm pro-human, and the challenge before us is not, are we going to get a financial crash? The challenge before us is, are we going to be a human society or an inhuman society? And we're using technology in very inhuman ways. And I think it's one of the things that makes the United States such an unpleasant place compared to so many other areas around the world.
Well, we're past our limit on time, so we'll have to discuss this another time. But yeah, it's very interesting seeing all this stuff in sci-fi programming, and then Elon Musk is talking about, human having implants in brains so people can compete with the advanced computers that are going to be rolled out in the next few years.
You know something? There's so many things wrong with that. I will pass until the next time.
Well, I mean, as long as Tesla stock stays high, right? It's worth more money now than General Motors, and it's produced.
But did Tesla's stock suddenly get all sorts of support because Elon Musk agreed to say all that bunk?
You may be right about that.
Yeah, I think I am.
Well,
Tesla was headed down the chute, and suddenly Musk is, encouraging everybody to back up their brain to the CIA, and now all of a sudden Tesla stock is headed up again.
I think it's so easy now, Catherine, for these American billionaires to hire like offshore hedge funds in the Caribbean and just, pay these guys off to trade their stock and move it off support levels if it's going to drop. So, and the SEC won't even go after them. So I don't know. Everything's it's a wild west out there, and a lot of the bureaucracy and regulation is just a pretense.
Well, there's no doubt that we're overregulated. So I think one of the reasons the market has been very encouraged is Trump is really committed to decreasing the amount of regulation. No society can survive with the amount of regulation we have.
Yeah, and certainly not an entrepreneurial one like the United States used to be, although it's not quite as much. But I want to thank you again for your time today, Catherine. You put out a beautiful newsletter. It's probably the most beautiful one I've ever seen. It's got lots of great color pages and charts and graphs. It's not on flimsy paper. It's definitely worth the money. And how can our listeners go and read your newsletter?
So we publish the Solari Report. It's a weekly interview and then a discussion by me called Money and Markets on what's going on in the world. And then we our subscribers, we find, are very, very busy, but they want to be in the know. So we publish a quarterly wrap-up and then an annual wrap-up. I mailed you the annual wrap-up, and it also comes in hardcover, which you have to order separately. But the wrap-up is designed, Jason, so that a very busy person can read our wrap-up 4 times a year and know more about what's going on, the 99.9% of the population. So it's really designed to keep a busy professional in the know about the deeper news.
Yeah, and there's a good reading list in there, too, if you have extra time like me. Well, thank you.
Okay, well, it's a great reading list.
Yeah, I saw the Devil's Chessboard on there. I was told to check that out recently, too, as well.
So. The best book on the Kennedy assassination, bar none. And there are a lot of great books on the Kennedy assassination, but this one is over the top the best. Outstanding.
Excellent. Well, it's on my wish list on Audible, so I will definitely get to it eventually. Catherine, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully I can have you back on again soon. Maybe when your next report comes out, I'll have you back on to discuss that one too.
We will send you the next wrap-up. You'll have it as soon as it comes out, Jason.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine.
Have a great day. Bye.
Wall Street for Main Street needs your help. YouTube stole $7,200 from Wall Street for Main Street in annualized YouTube AdWords revenues, and they kneecapped our analytics down by more than 80% across the board since September 2016 with their new censorship algorithms to stop the rapid growth of our channel. That was money we could have used to upgrade our website, pay bills, and invest in improving our content and growing our business. Our audience of loyal listeners is all over the globe and so large now that if most or all of our listeners were to commit to donating $1 to $5 each month to our Patreon account, we could easily meet our goal on Patreon. Wall Street for Main Street also accepts one-time donations on our main wallstreetformainstreet.com website. That's WALLSTFORMAINST.com website via PayPal, Gold Money, or Bitcoin. We also accept donations of physical precious metals that can be mailed to us. Thanks to all listeners who have already made a donation, and thanks in advance to any listeners who make a future donation or contribution to the growth, improvement, and success of Wall Street for Main Street.